One of the things I've noticed always about you is how prolific you are. But one thing I've noticed about you in recent years is how busy you are. You seem to, every time I look at some like literature conference or award ceremony or something, you're there. And I wonder about that balance between being prolific and being busy. I know a few other writers who have had some like big successes in the last few years have just not managed to get much writing done. But that doesn't seem to have been too much of a problem for you.
I am kind of finding that in the last couple of years. I had a baby as well 3 years ago. And so I just find it really difficult to get back into that writing mode. And also I think I put a lot of pressure on myself. So I've been working on a novel now for such a long time and I just left it. I wrote 60,000 words and then I just sort of left it and I haven't gone back to it. And it's almost at that point where it's going to be too late. I'm going to have lost the thread in my mind of what it's meant to be. But yeah, it is hard. The only thing is, the reason that I kind of accept basically all invitations is that I enjoy it all very much. So, if you get a chance to speak at a conference, that sounds like a really boring thing, but actually you get to chat with lots of really interesting people. You get to meet just people who appreciate the same things as you. Nerds, basically. You get to meet loads of nerds, and that's why.
But you do. I mean, I think people who, non-writers do forget that to get any work done, to be a writer, to be, however you want to define the word, but to become successful, you have to spend a lot of time in a room on your own.
Yeah. And I enjoy that bit. That's my favourite bit. But it's just finding those pockets of time and kind of, I can't do it in a way that, I can do 2 hours in the morning and then I go off and do another kind of job or I do, a school visit or something. If I've got something on, I can't write that day. And so you need to sort of schedule in times right. And you don't know how much you're going to write in that time. So it always feels like a sort of gamble to me.
The book that you've I'm very interested in the idea because sometimes I write things and I'll write a draft of, 60, 70, 80,000 words or something. And then it doesn't really kind of spark and I know how much work it needs. And then I'll move on to something else and I'll go back and find, I remember writing that 2 summers ago or 2 years ago. Do you find that there is that cut-off point where you've drifted enough away from an idea?
I'd say I've got sort of 20 or 30 first chapters of things. So it's usually after that sort of amount of time that I think, no, this isn't it. And I am terrible for getting a sort of shiny new idea and thinking, this is not the thing I want to do. I want to do that as a thing. I'm really bad at that. But I think now that I'm 60,000 words in, I am committed. I like the idea of what I've written, but it's the first thing that I've written originally in English. So there's lots around that I'm like, is this my English voice? Interesting. Do you know what I mean?
Do you feel
fun.
like it's? I mean, I know you've translated quite a bit of your Welsh work into English yourself, but does it feel like starting again, writing? Straight off in English, like you're relearning everything.
And the content is really different as well, and I'm trying to work out why the themes and the characters feel different in English. But it's, I don't know, I think that when you're writing in whatever language, you sort of fall in love with that language again because you kind of see how pliable it is and how you can use words and, descriptions to conjure up so many different feelings and images. I'm still bewitched by that idea that if I write a paragraph of something, the film in my head will be completely different to the film in your head when you're reading it, and it will be different for everyone. And I really love that when you're reading something, a lot of you goes into it. It's a reflection of you as a reader as well, what you see. And I think that's true about language as well, that will Welsh-speaking readers read my English work and, see it differently because it's in English and they're used to my Welsh voice. I don't know.
That must be quite. I mean, not that I want to make you any more anxious about it than you might already be, but that must be.
I'm already up there with the anxiety on this one.
But it must be very daunting, though. It must be. I mean, I'm sort of at that stage where I realise that every time you start writing a book, it's you're an infant again, rather than. I sort of envy. I had a moment many years ago with a book of mine where I thought I'd found a formula, or if I could repeat that formula, I could serve the things I needed within myself as a writer, but also present something that was going to work for a reader, that was always going to be entertaining, but also slightly off center. And then I went on to the next book with that idea in my mind, and it couldn't work. It just couldn't work at all. So I've realized that every book I'm back to being an infant.
I think it's almost more extreme than that, because if you've written something and people have read it and enjoyed it, the temptation is always going to be to go and, okay, what was good about that? What worked? What did they like about that? But then if you try and repeat that again, it's just never going to be the same. And you have to, I always kind of think, I have to be true to the current idea and who I am now and what I want to write now. But that's really simplistic, because it's really difficult to figure out who you are now and which idea is the right one for you to live with and develop at whatever moment. It is, yeah. You can spend a lot of time thinking about this stuff, though, I think. And we do overcomplicate. I'm a massive overthinker, and sometimes I think, just write the book, Manon, for God's sake.
But 60,000 words 60,000 words is a long way in. That's potentially you're moving into the final act, unless it's going to be, unless it's halfway through, which of course it could be.
No,
that's a long way into. Maybe it's the sort of, maybe I get to that stage sometimes, and that's why a lot of the endings of my books, at least the ones that haven't been published, are the problem areas, because I just need to get over the line. And you always think, well, I'll come back to that, I'll sort that out. It's about being the shark, right? If you don't keep moving forward, you'll die.
God, that's so depressing, Gary.
It wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be inspiring. No.
I think it's been interesting with this one, because I had this idea and it's sort of really loosely based on AI. So that's the theme of it, is AI and how we react to AI. But what happened was my eldest child was going to university. He started last September, and I was so anxious about this, and I was trying not to show it, and like, oh my God, what am I going to do when he's gone? Oh my God. And I focused all that energy on writing. So I was writing, the weeks before he was going, I was writing 5,000 words a day. And then he went to uni and he was fine. And it was like, oh God, okay, that energy is just gone. So I've just left it. And it's not thematically anything to do with that, but I think that anxious energy is a lot of what feeds my work, is that I need to be quite worried about stuff in order to write it.
That just fires up so many questions about how prolific you are.
I can always find stuff to worry about. Yeah.
So do you think that's the sort of energy? I mean, I have conversations on this subject sort of quite frequently. Non-writers ask me, like, what is it that makes you write and makes you a writer? And not that I ever would have known this starting out, but now I realise that it's how I process my engagement with the world. It's how I learn to, even if I'm writing, a novel about aliens, it's still how I'm learning to engage with the world. It's these things are very personal to me, and working them out. It's this idea, isn't it, that the reason why storytelling is so important to the human race is because it provides structure to life, which life just doesn't have. And of course, over millennia, we've fooled ourselves into thinking that our life is a story, because we tell stories. And in fact, we tell stories because life isn't a story. There is no rhyme or reason. I know this is a sort of slightly existential point, but there is no rhyme or reason. There is no cause and consequence in a sort of supernatural sense. There is just the day-to-day, and things happen. Sometimes one thing will cause inevitably another thing, but a lot of the times it doesn't. You know, this is the light-hearted podcast I was after. There is no justice. There is no point to life. Don't you agree?
Oh, yeah. Well, depends. Yeah, I've never really thought about it in that way. I think I find stories everywhere in real life too, and I really love biography. So a lot of what I read actually is kind of really old biographies, particularly like Welsh language biography books from the 60s that have been forgotten, and they're all about sort of someone who was raised in a quarrying community, and it's all about the chapel, and it always gets a bit miserable. And then when they reach about 18 or 19, I get bored. But I do find those stories really, really fascinating. And what's difficult is to sort of imagine your own life in that way. I have been asked to write an autobiography at one point. And of course, I rejected the idea out of hand. But it's funny to frame your own story in that way. And I think that's interesting, though, that I'm exactly like you. So it's the stuff that keeps me awake at night is what feeds whatever I'm writing at that time. And I am socially a very awkward person. I find it really difficult to socialize with people, and I find it exhausting, really, really tiring to be in the company of anyone who isn't in my immediate family. And I think a lot of my writing is, me feeling like an alien trying to understand this species that apparently I'm a part of, but I really don't get quite a lot of human behaviour, and trying to understand that, giving it to another character and getting them to explore it for me.
Wales Arts Review is back, and it's a podcast. Or rather, the new Wales Arts Review is being built before your very eyes around the central column of my conversations with some of the most interesting and vital cultural figures working today. But for us to survive and grow this time, we very much need your help. If you like what we're doing, like what we stand for, then like our posts, and most importantly, subscribe. The more subscribers to our Substack newsletter and YouTube channel, the better placed we will be to grow and pay writers to tackle the most pressing cultural subjects of the day. Via Substack, you can become a paid subscriber and gain access to exclusive content and an ever-growing Wales Arts Review archive. And by hitting the subscribe button on our YouTube channel, not only do you let the platform know you'd like to see more of our stuff, but you increase the chances of us drawing down revenue from ads. All that goes back into Wales Arts Review to help us grow and improve. We need your support. Press those buttons and then go and enjoy our stuff. It's all for you anyway.
Rejecting the idea of an autobiography out of hand is quite interesting, though, isn't it? I mean,
yeah. Well, I just think
I always find with biography, I like reading. I love reading biographies as well. But there is something when you get to the end of one. I got to try reading more biographies, but only up until the person is to the age of 18, and then just because I find even somebody who has had the most fascinating, energetic, impactful life, you get to the end of 600 pages and you go, well, the essence of that existence was boiled down to 600 pages. I mean, you don't get the whole story. You don't get all of, you don't get all of the day-to-day and the colours, and it's boiled down to a story arc, which I don't think literature forces good literature forces these things into these shapes that life just isn't those shapes.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's the same for you. If I'm writing fiction, I don't plan anything when I'm writing, but I spend a lot of time with the characters, creating the characters and really, really fleshing them out before I ever write anything down. And I kind of feel that even when I'm writing a novel, I will know far more about the character than the reader ever will. to me, they might have quite boring lives in some way. And it's not necessarily sort of written like that in the book, but they have to feel completely real to me. And maybe that's because I read so much biography that I'm thinking, yeah, there's, they still go to B&M to buy washing powder, and they still, go to Starbucks and don't know what the sizes mean, and those details are really important to me in characters.
That's very much a sort of an actor's approach, though, isn't it, to creating a character, knowing the actor. I mean, you started out acting, didn't you? So I mean, I do similar sort of things, but maybe not quite as much depth as what washing powder they're buying and from where. but it feels like, knowing your character is the inside and out is the best way to make them real to the person you're presenting them to.
Yeah.
Many actors, write pages and pages of biography of their experiences in school for their characters, and that seems to be was your time as an actor when you were younger has that in other ways influenced the way you create stories and characters?
100%. I mean, I was really lucky because I went straight from school. I did my A-levels, and then I went straight from school into an acting job. And I was an actor until I had my first child, so maybe 3 or 4 years. And it was a great experience. It was brilliant. And you just get to know yourself in a way that is really interesting and quite unforgiving, I think. And you have to explore the things you don't like. And I think maybe that's the most useful thing, is that maybe you're playing a character that's not very likable, but in order to play that character, you have to like them a little bit, and you have to come up with a story as to why they are the way they are. And I'm talking, most of the jobs I did, I was working in theatre and education, so they were shows for really young children, so they would be really kind of quite simplistic arcs within the character, but I would, of course, overcomplicate and overthink everything. But I think now when I'm writing, one of the most important things for me is to learn how to love the baddies. So if there's a character that I really don't like, the most important thing for me to do is to find something to love in them. And that probably does come from the acting days.
It's such an important lesson, though, isn't it? I can't remember which actor it was, but somebody who really wanted to play Hitler. It might have been like Alec Guinness or something, and they said, "Well, how do you really if you have to find something that you like in everybody, something sympathetic, how did you do that with Hitler?" He said, "Well, he loved dogs. It wasn't that difficult. The moment you read that he loved his dogs, you can find something in there to attach yourself to and create a full character." So creating a character for you must be, in creating your villains must be, not must be partially, it must be entirely about finding that humanity in them, finding it. Sometimes it can be, I'm not saying I've ever read you doing this, but sometimes it can be the worst thing you can do is try to explain the motivations of a villain, right?
Yeah.
But you knowing them, obviously, is important. You being able to understand them is important as the writer.
Yeah, and I think, in the early days, I didn't do that enough. And you can read it in the work. You can tell that sort of, that character's bad, and there's no tone there at all. And I notice it in other people's work as well. I think lots of writers are really, really brilliant at doing this, that are just humanising your characters, and that they're being really, they occupy a space in my mind that is quite, I still miss them. I still miss the characters that I wrote 15 years ago. And I think about them fondly in the same way as I'd think about someone I was at school with. I still have that love for them, really. And I know
Do
that
you
sounds
find...
pretentious, and I don't care.
No, this is the pretentious podcast. Well, I've
Yes.
already mentioned existentialism, so that's opened the
And
door to
fab.
God
Yeah,
knows
you
what,
started
really.
it.
Do you find yourself... This may be a stupid question rather than a pretentious one, but do you find yourself writing yourself into all of your books in some way or another? As
Unconsciously,
characters, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
I think about 5 years after publishing, I sort of think back and I think, oh shit, that was supposed to be fiction. But I can see myself very clearly, usually in the main characters. But sometimes when I'm writing for kids, sometimes I'm the mother or the father character. Yeah, writing a lot not from experience, but just from state of mind, I think.
Hmm.
Mm.
I've found myself in times past, like, professing as much as possible at festivals and book events and stuff that, that this character is based on my experiences but is not me. And then, like you say, years later you realise, well, the reason why I was so determined for it not to be me is because I don't like them.
Yeah.
I find them grating and nauseating, and yes, they are me. It turns out.
Yeah. No, it's a really interesting one to look back on as well. And I find it really liberating because I only sort of started confessing this to myself a couple of years ago. It's all about me, really, the writing. It's all ego because it's all sort of me against the world or me with the world. But once you kind of accept that and accept that whatever you're writing now as well and whatever you'll write in the future, there will be a hell of a lot of you in it. I find that quite liberating because then you're not sort of stressing about, ooh, that's a bit close to my own life or my own personality or whatever. It's like, yeah, that's fine. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's the writing life is an interesting one in that you are continuously. I suppose there's maybe you didn't have this, but when you're a bit younger and maybe you have your first publications coming out and you think, okay, well, this is the beginning. I've reached the stage now, and if I keep writing good stories, then but in fact you just keep discovering things about the craft and about yourself, and every book is, or every project, every story, because of course you write across almost all mediums. Have you written any poetry? Is that the only thing that you've avoided, or have you had any poetry published?
Yeah.
I should ask, have you shared any poetry? Because we've all written poetry, right?
Do you want to know something really? Oh gosh! So in the a lot of quarry towns in North Wales, there are sort of slate inserts in the pavements of poetry by local poets and authors. So you've got some in Caernarfon on the dock. You've got some in Blaenau Ffestiniog, and they did some here in Tywyn where I live, and they asked me to write poetry, so couplets. And I'd written some poetry before, but not. I find poetry really scary. But anyway, I did it, and now when I'm walking to the co-op, I'm walking. It's like walking across your own grave. It's really weird. It's brilliant. I mean, it's really lovely and such an honour. But also, it's like these are going to be here for longer than me, probably. I remember I met Hannah Nisa in Hay last year or the year before, and we had a chat. And I was telling her about I'm really scared of poetry. I find it really difficult to understand, impossible to write. And somehow I ended up calling her the Voldemort of Welsh poetry, which she never allows me to forget. She thought it was amazing. It's like, since the moment I said that to her, it was like, yeah, we're friends now. But what I was trying to say, because, she was the national poet of Wales, And it was like, yeah, you're the main one. You're the main one of this sort of art form that I am absolutely intimidated by.
The main villain.
Yeah. And she was like, "What? Yeah, but why is it a bad thing? Voldemort is bad." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, it's just because of that's my thing. I don't understand it. I do find it really quite scary, poetry."
Do you read a lot of poetry, though?
No. Some. And, you know, the Welsh language, I do find it really interesting and wonderful that really the most respected person within the Welsh cultural community is whoever wins the chair at the Eisteddfod that year. It's like that is the pinnacle of Welsh language cultural life. And I would never be able to write a poem like that because it's in Cynghanedd, you know, it's in with a very strict meter, which baffles me still. But yeah, I'm not great at reading poetry, really.
You've won everything else, though. That must be slightly annoying that the pinnacle is the one thing that you'd never really be entered for.
Oh, yes. I've never thought of it like that before, but thank you, Gary.
Oh,
you're right.
This is going well.
But then it does mean because it's so difficult, there's like an extra respect there from me. It's like, yeah, I don't understand how anyone could do that. And I can read those poems and like think, God, how did you say that in that way whilst keeping to these rules that seem to me just, well, my brain just doesn't work that way. I just don't understand how you could do that.
But you've written across every other form that I can think of. Theatre. I mean, not just as an actor, but you've maintained a relationship with theatre, haven't you?
Yeah. I think acting helps so much for that. I'm really grateful. You know, I went to be an actor kind of instead of going to university, which I didn't think about it that way before. But yeah, it's really, really helped me, and I love the theatre, and I think there's something in that collaboration when you're working in theatre that's really wonderful, really wonderful. And one of the great things I think about visiting the theatre is that life now is so, God, you know, you don't just watch telly anymore. You watch telly and you've got your phone in your hand. And there's other stuff going on. And when you're listening to the radio, you're sort of doing other things at the same time. Even when you're listening to music, you're not sitting there actively listening. But with the theatre, you are forced to take that journey and nothing else. And I think that's just brilliant. And what a privilege to be able to be given that voice as well, you know. That people give their time and pay money to see something that you've come up with and that you've collaborated with. I think, yeah, that's a great responsibility.
I found when writing the play that I had on a few years ago that the instincts that I'd built up over decades of writing prose were the most difficult things to overcome. Do you, I mean, it is apart from the fact that you have to use words to create stories and characters, it is a completely different set of instincts. I mean, it's obviously a different medium and a different discipline, but the instincts I found were difficult. And having written the play but then developing it in the rehearsal room and finding the lines that were clunky in actors' mouths because the way you read dialogue on a page in a novel is very different to the way an actor picks it up and puts it out there into the air, as it were.
Yeah, I find it's quite a scary experience because, as you say, you know, the way that you read it in your head is going to be completely different to the way it's read in the rehearsal room, and you have to accept that you're just a part of that process in a way that with a book, of course, you've got an editor, but it's your name on the book at the end of the day, and you get to say, no, I don't want to change that. And I feel like with theatre, there's much more of a feeling that sometimes you have to accept that people know better than you. And that's really hard for someone who's sort of mainly written books. And then you go into a rehearsal room and you sort of think, someone says scene 6 doesn't work. I think we should get rid of scene 6. And I'm like, what? But I wrote that. How could you get rid of something I wrote? And you have to, you learn that people do know better than you. And they do sort of...
In that sense, it is a completely different thing, because when you work with an editor is working with you, obviously from an editor's perspective, but with the sympathies of a writer.
Yeah.
Whereas in theatre, if a director, some directors I've experienced, have no... In fact, the director on my play, I got him a T-shirt printed that he wore at the opening night, which said, I never look at the script. Which he did enjoy.
Oh God!
but I mean, that's what I found so enriching and enjoyable, was having people there who weren't writers and weren't, in the way that an editor is, weren't literary people. They were theatre people. So they were looking at they could say, well, scene 6 has to go, and you're thinking, but that's where this happens and I develop this element of this character, and you don't need that. That'll come out elsewhere.
Yeah.
The audience will get that. You don't need that.
It's that trust as well, isn't it? As well as that, you have to trust that you're not going to be in the rehearsal room for the whole time, and you have to accept that. Yeah, I am giving this play to these people now, and I am entrusting it to those people, and it's not mine anymore, or it's not completely mine anymore. And I think that's a really healthy thing to do as a writer, is to sort of relinquish control, because we can be really controlling, I think, as writers. I definitely am.
I think that's what we are, though, isn't it? That is, I mean, if you want to go back into psychoanalysis, it's like, creating our own little worlds and playing God and deciding what it is everybody does. And do we feel like a happy ending or a tragic ending today?
Yeah, yeah. I still feel really bad about the things that I've done to some of my characters. Yeah.
Well, particularly if they're lingering, if they're the ghosts in your house, if they're still lingering with you all these years later.
Yeah. I went to Fran Wen, the theatre company Fran Wen, who did the stage version of my book, Llyfr Glas Snepper. And in the book is a little girl, a toddler girl, and they used puppets for the theatre show. And then that happened in 2020, so the show was sort of happened right before lockdown. And then a couple of months ago, I went to Neath, where Fran Wen is, their headquarters now in Bangor. And I sort of looked behind the curtain looking for something, and she was there, this puppet, just sort of, I was like, God, that's horrible. That's absolutely horrible. Yeah.
Oh my God, that would be, I mean, I would need therapy after that, talking about psychoanalysis. I don't know how there's so much to unpack there that I don't think we've got time, even in this timeless podcast.
I don't want to unpack that. I want to keep that in the box.
Of course, I mean, maybe using puppets is a bit of a ham-handed segue into the area of writing for children, but you've written over 20 novels for kids and young people.
Yeah.
And for a long time, that was your thing. That was what you did until you started writing. I mean, I hate all these novels for adults. I hate all these labels and categories. It's marketing more than anything, isn't it? But for sake of ease, you're that's where a lot of this impression I have of you of being so prolific is that you got into writing for children, and you just wrote so many and still do. I take it you haven't left that behind.
No.
your latest, your last book was Greta, or am I missing any out?
No, I
This is
think
the
that
problem
was...
you see when...
Greta was originally in Welsh, Llechi, which is a sort of YA whodunit. And that's a really interesting one, because in Welsh, it's quite a grisly book, but it's on the GCSE syllabus for the Welsh language. But when I tried to get it published in English, every single person said, you cannot possibly publish this as YA. It's far too much. It's far too dark. And so in the end, I sort of had to add more words and publish it as a novel for adults. And I find that really fascinating, because it's like nobody in Wales has ever said this is too grisly. And it was exactly the same story. It was
I
translated
mean,
pretty straight.
that's more than fascinating. That sounds like a public, like, national debate we should be having, shouldn't it? That
100%.
Welsh language kids are really into their gritty, gory horror books, whereas...
But we allow
English...
them as well. I mean,
Yeah.
sort of to think it's not, that they actually do it at GCSE. And when I found that, I thought, God, fair play, because there's a lot in that book. But I did find that really interesting, that no one had said anything in Welsh, and that's all people were saying in English.
You've come up against this, well, up against it, but you've come to this time and time again with translations of your work, as I'm sure a lot of writers who are able... I've had my books translated into languages I don't understand, so I've never been able to see the differences in those translations. You just sort of have the faith in the translator and the publisher, right? You just kind of... I mean, you have as well. You've had your work translated into languages I assume you don't understand, but when you and you do the translations yourself, having conversations with publishers and editors must be invaluable. But I remember you saying years and years ago, they were with the English translation of the Blue Book of Nebo, that because it was... Or was it a question I was asking you? I can't remember. That because it's a book that is about the Welsh language, that's the core of the book. Questions about the language. That to translate it into English must have changed the entire sort of framework of the book, really. Because I mean...
Yeah.
Was that true? We talked about that a long time ago, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. It's an interesting one with the Blue Book of Nebo, because I had to change a little bit of the story so that it would sort of, because it's written as sort of as diaries. In my head, I had to think, well, why are they writing it in English now? Because these characters would, where they live and how they lived, I thought, yeah, these would be Welsh speakers, so why would they be writing in English? And so I had to change a little bit of the story. But it's a weird one, because I feel like the English version of the Blue Book of Nebo has more of a Welsh identity. The Welsh is more of a theme within it, whereas in Welsh it was more about sort of feeling that you could speak in Welsh again, that even if your Welsh isn't perfect, that you are allowed to use it and, take possession of it and read these books. But yeah, it feels Welsher to me in English. It's really weird.
That's really interesting.
Mm.
But the translating your own work must. I mean, I suppose that does make you more of a control freak than me. Do you translate your... Have you translated your own work out of necessity in some cases? Like, well, if I do this, then I can present it to a publisher, or is it that control?
I think it started because the Wales Literature Exchange, they do a programme every year where they get, they pick some Welsh books and then they try to market them abroad to be translated into other languages, and they ask you to translate a part of your book. Or they say, well, we can get a translator in, but it's such a short part that they want. I thought, oh God, I might as well just do that myself, and then really enjoying it and actually, really finding my love for the English language as well. And oh God, it's such a pleasure to be writing in one language and then to sort of feel your way around those words and how you sort of frame that bit of that book. And then turning to your other language and thinking, God, that's a lovely one as well. I mean, I can say exactly the same thing in that language, but it sounds more poetic. It's a way of falling in love with both languages. I'm really, really lucky to have been bilingual, since I can remember. My parents were really great for doing that, I think, because it's something that I've never had to put any effort into, but it's something that I get really a lot of joy out of.
What were you reading when you were a kid? What was the
everything?
Because I see you as one of those like almost like pure storytellers. Your books are meticulously structured and I mean this from me. This is a huge compliment. In quite meticulously structured in quite an old-fashioned way.
Oh, thank you.
That you don't have to, as a reader, you don't have to be thinking about, well, where is how does this fit in with this? It's everything. Everything is holding something up. That old like creative writing thing of character is plot is theme is place. All of that.
Mm-hmm.
So when you say you were reading everything, you were just like to count the influences on you growing up would be.
It was just, whatever I could get my hands on. It's really interesting actually recently because as you were saying, I've been writing for children for so long, and I think I've been rallying against my Enid Blyton soul a little bit. And now that I'm sort of in my 40s and I'm like, I quite want to write a book like that. I kind of want to write something quite sweet all of a sudden. Do you know what I mean? And old-fashioned and a bit unrealistic. Because everything I write is so dark. But I did read a lot of Blyton. I read loads of Judy Blume books, Paula Danzig books, these American books about friendships and, fancying boys and stuff that didn't really exist in my mother tongue at that time. I mean, now they do and it's fab. But at that time, that kind of Americanism was just so exotic. But I think my favourite book, and I've read this book every year, I read it every autumn since I was 11, is Boy by Roald Dahl.
Wow.
I just love that book so much. And it never loses its magic for me. I just think it's so wonderful. Because it's funny. It's really funny, but there's heart in it. The way he talks about his mother. There's a part that, oh God, when he goes away to boarding school, he works out in which direction, the direction where he faces home in Llandav, and he always sleeps facing home. And I remember reading that when I was really young and really feeling that sort of, oh God, that hurts a lot. But also, he was Roald Dahl, who was this massive, successful, charming man. But still, you could see the child in him. And I think that book still touches me now,
That's so fascinating. I remember we read it in school as a class, probably when I was about 12 or 13. And I remember years later sort of returning to it and realizing that I think that was the wrong time to give us that book, because we were, well, it was a mixed school, but we were boys ourselves, and sort of positioning it in that character, that public character of Roald Dahl as his childhood. And of course, still to this day, the only thing I really remember from reading it in school was when he has his adenoids out.
That's horrible. That's a horrible bit to remember. But there's a blue plaque in Llandav. There's a blue plaque where the sweet shop was. Yes, and I was walking out of Spa in Llandav, and I sort of looked up and saw this plaque, and it was really, oh my gosh. But also, that's not what it was like, in my mind. That's not what it was.
Yeah.
What? But I was lucky as well.
It's
I
like
had
a florist now or something, isn't it? It's still a shop, isn't it? But it's,
And it's really sweet and nice and sweet. It's really... I was lucky as well. I had a really brilliant teacher in year 5 and 6 who used to read us books, as a class, and she read this wonderful Welsh book called O'r Tywyllwch by Mair Wyn Hughes, and it was about the world getting so warm that everyone had to go and live in cities underground. That was brilliant. Stig of the Dump was one of those as well, that, still a book I absolutely love. But I think the greatest privilege of my life and, of my career, really, are my parents, because both very creative people. My mother read to me a lot when I was a child, and she carried on reading to me even when I could read independently. So I've got really lovely memories of being sort of 9, 10 years old and Mum sitting on the sofa and reading books. And it wasn't even so much about the books themselves, but it was that bond of sharing a story. And again, back to that thing of the film she would have seen in her head when we were reading those books would have been really different to mine, but we were experiencing it together. And I don't know if I would be a writer now if it wasn't for those moments, to be honest. I started writing after I lost my mum. My mum died young. And a lot of what I was writing to begin with was to do with her. It still is, really. But I think that was part of it. Was kind of, books are a part of the way that we bonded, and going back to that and sort of trying to create that myself. She was a character in the first books that I wrote as well. So
yeah, that's very interesting. There's a writer, I can't remember who it is, like Maxwell Davis or something, one of those writers from the 50s. And I remember seeing an interview with him, and he was saying he became a writer when his mother died, and he spent his entire writing career, in his words, like bringing her back into the room. Like all of his books were about growing up in the 20s and 30s and families, and it was about just returning to those places and returning to those people and having them still around,
Yeah, it is. It's an interesting process, because when I look back at the things that I've written and the things that I'm writing now as well, I can always see either her influence or the influence of having lost her when she was young. It's a thread, definitely.
We're not going to psychoanalyze. That's not what the podcast is. But
that's up to the listeners to do.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm just thinking of like the sort of mother character in the Blue Book of Nebo. I always thought of the mother as you in a way, not in a like a weird sort of way, but because I know you a little bit, and reading the book, that was kind of the figure that I had in my mind, not getting in the way of anything of the story or anything. But now I think, that's interesting. Was she is the mother, your mother, and you, and
do you know what?
That's a very interesting, an interesting way that literature provides things for us as writers.
Yeah, I was saying earlier about the theatre version of that book, and I remember when we were sort of talking about it with Franwen, the theatre company, they asked me, have you thought about casting? And I said, I really like Tara Bethan as Rowena. And I didn't know Tara then, but I'd seen her acting and I thought she was really good and I thought she would fit. And so she was cast. And then I went to the first days of rehearsals and I found myself being a bit of a cow to Tara, really. I was kind of finding myself unable to look at her properly and feeling just really awkward in her presence. And I think after the second day, I was like, oh God, I've got to talk to her about this because I feel like I'm talking to everyone except for her. And I said, I'm really sorry, but when I'm watching you read these words, I'm realising that you're acting me and that I've written myself, and it's taken until now to realise. And she was like, I completely get that. And afterwards we were like, it was a lot easier and became really good friends. But there's something about sort of seeing that someone flesh and blood acting a character that actually you haven't really fully accepted is a version of yourself. That's a really weird one.
My God, that is complex. I realised a long time ago with my little boy, if ever I'm like short-tempered with him or a little bit, cranky with him, I've realised that it's because he's so much like me rather than anything else. And that's, yeah. I suppose that ties back to my realisation that the characters in my books that are me, I really don't like very much. There's some kind of thread there which I'm not sure I want to tug at, to be honest.
No, leave it.
No, leave that.
Leave it for the next
That's
book.
just occurred to me that those things are connected. I love the idea, though. We've talked about reading biographies and autobiographies and how that the book that you return to every year is Roald Dahl's, his own coming of age story. Were you attracted to his books otherwise?
Yeah, I do. I think he's a really clever storyteller. But I have to say, I enjoy Boy Going Solo, his other biography, more than the rest now. And I do enjoy the short stories as well. I like the darkness in them.
His books are, I know this is not like any great groundbreaking literary criticism, but his books are dark. A few years ago, I wrote a piece on Fantastic Mr. Fox, and I'd forgotten, because I hadn't read it since I was a kid, I just remembered loving it. I'd forgotten just how harsh that book is, how, Boggis Bunsen Bean tried to starve the Fox family to death in the ground. And there's no sort of, with some kids' books, there's an inevitable plot point like that, but it's sort of not explicitly put that way. But in Dahl just did not care. He just approached everything head on, really.
There's a story in the collection, The Wonderful Story of Henry Sugar, which is, I think it's sort of labelled as for older children, but still children, right? Where there's a couple of bullies. There's a boy that's a bird watcher, and he's watching this swan, and the swan has little cygnets, and he's watching them through binoculars, and then these bullies turn up, and they cut the wings off the swan and tie them to the boy, and they make him say horrible things about his own parents. And I just, even now, that is so horrible to read. But, to read it as, I don't know, a 10 or an 11-year-old child is absolutely awful. But then these children do go through things, and they do have really negative experiences, and somehow, I don't know, I think we can be in denial a little bit about that, and we don't really talk about the dark side of things, thinking, well, that's not part of their experience, but it is. And I think that's one of the things that kids love about Dahl, is that he trusts them with this stuff. Trusts them to be able to cope.
Do you think we don't trust kids that way anymore? I mean, this is sort of tiptoeing into the conversation about rewriting classic books for a more sensitive age. Dahl's been obviously at the centre of that with his, what should we say, like cultural insensitivities in certain, in certain specific aspects. But I know there has been people talking about, his books are too dark and too cruel, take out some of the cruelty in the books. But that was part that for all of the books I read when I was a kid, the kids' books I read when I was a kid, if I see the cover of a book now that I read when I was 8, I've forgotten that book. But it's great to be reminded of an, Alan Alberg book or something like that, where I don't really remember, but I remember the cover, and it's one of those like moments, these nostalgic Madeleine Biscuit moments. And but Roald Dahl is a writer that I can tell you I can quote, and I can't do that I'm not a quoter. I can't do that with anybody. And I think it is because he was published in an age where maybe the publishers had more, I don't want to say respect, because it insinuates that they don't now, and I don't think that's true. But the sensitivities are a little overcooked, maybe.
I think that now we have a little bit of an attitude of us and them with kids, which is a really weird thing for society to have done. Because I don't know, when I'm writing, my children's books tend to have quite, difficult themes, and it's not the Blyton-esque stuff that I might be writing now. But yeah, I think that we think about them as a different species and as being generally unable to cope. And this is at a time when life is so hard for these young people and children. All these pressures heaped upon them, but we're worried about, if they read about bullies, they're going to be quite upset about that. I think, no, we have to reflect that lives that they lead and the hardness of that. I think cultural sensitivity is a different matter. We have to be culturally sensitive, and I agree with those changes, to be honest. But there's a danger in just creating just blandness for young people.
Yeah, and that's the last thing we want our kids to have, right? Is the bland cultural experiences, bland reading experiences.
Yeah.
I always think, because, with film as well, I mean, like most kids of our generation, like, we watched films that were too old for us when we were kids, right?
Yeah.
And even though I wouldn't, as a parent, like, show like my little boy a film that was too old for him, I think I would, when it gets to that stage, I would consciously maybe like not police him quite as much as I probably should, because I want him to have the possibilities of cultural education that I had as a kid.
Yeah.
Watching ghost stories when I was 10, and watching like Robert Wise's The Haunting one late night on Christmas Eve, because I was like 9 and everyone else had gone to bed, and it was on Channel 4, and it terrified me. But I think it's been like, that movie has been like one of the cornerstones of my like cultural education, and as a writer as well. And
the things that we're going to see on TikTok and Instagram are so much worse than any book they're going to read or any film that they're going to watch. And that's really horrible. That life that they have to lead, in a way, that sort of digital life that they have to lead, it's going to do far more damage than, reading The Witches is going to do.
Yeah. Well, maybe not watching The Witches, though, because that was Angelica
really
Houston thing, that was a bit much. I like the fact with The Witches, they changed the ending of the film because the studio, they shot it, didn't they? And then the studio said he has to become a boy again, because in the book he remains a mouse.
Right?
I
didn't know that. That's why they changed that.
Yeah, so they changed, but yet The Witches parts are some of the most terrifying things of that decade of cinema.
But then you remember
the conference, and
you remember them.
Yeah. Yeah, and you feel a bit, if you know the book and the film, you feel a bit shortchanged at the end, because it's such a Roald Dahl thing, though, right? To keep it, so when he's a mouse forever now, he can never be a boy. There you go,
because he's a mouse, he will die around the same time as his grandmother, so he will never have to be on his own.
That's kind of Roald Dahl beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah,
in a Dahl way.
Oh God, it's lovely.
Like so complicatedly beautiful that maybe too much for Hollywood.
Oh, definitely.
You're talking about your storytelling, and like I say, I think of you as like one of those sort of meticulous storytellers. The building blocks are there, and they allow you to do the things that you do. Ages ago, we had a very brief conversation about John Wyndham, and I think I can't remember what you would have been working on at the time, but I was reading a lot of John Wyndham at the time as well, and it was a pure coincidence. And I just thought, my God, you and I should start like some kind of John Wyndham magazine or a John Wyndham conference or something.
Imagine a
I
John
ended-
Wyndham's like Comic Con type deal that you had
Oh
to
my
dress
God.
up as John Wyndham characters.
But I think
Please.
there's an attraction of Wyndham and certain. I mean, I think he's the master of those 50s urban sci-fi, those English urban sci-fis of the 50s. He's the guy. But there's something about people who discover Wyndham, and not that he's a secret or anything, but there's a lot to read out there, isn't there? People who discover him become devotees, and often if they're writers who understand his devotion to structure and to the framework of storytelling.
Do you know what I really love about John Wyndham is that he creates these sort of sci-fi stories that are quite bonkers, and obviously you're not quite in the real world there, but the characters, I think he's a character-led author because I always believe in the characters. And I think that's what's missing in a lot of sci-fi, is that it's just so plot-driven. The time isn't taken to actually spend time with the characters. That's what I love about him, is that I believe them.
Well, I think they're probably outliers to prove me wrong, but I think his body of work in the 40s and 50s is the turning point for science fiction becoming a part of literary fiction or whatever the labels are nowadays. But that science fiction up until then had like stock characters and it was about ideas, and then he comes in and he decides that the people who save his worlds are ordinary people who just happen to have the right set of skills. They're not scientists. They're like teachers, or they're not. It's not science that will save the world. I'm thinking of Midwich Cuckoos, and these are people who have careers and jobs, and it just so happens that those set of skills in those jobs are the right ones to defeat whatever the alien threat is at that point.
Yeah, there's an ordinariness about those characters that I really appreciate, I think. And it makes it so much more frightening because you imagine yourself in those worlds. I think it's brilliant.
Were you thinking of, going back to the Blue Book, and I go back to the Blue Book of Nebba because I think it's your, technically most successful book so far, in both languages. But do you think it was writers like Wyndham that you were thinking of when you were writing that? It feels like a sort of a Wyndham-esque book.
Yeah, I think I wanted to create something that was, this huge event, this nuclear apocalypse, but I didn't want to create any heroes. I wanted to create someone that was really ordinary and average, and maybe felt like they were failing a little bit in the world as it is now, and to see how they would react to it. I'm not really interested in heroes.
There's the tagline. There's the headline for the podcast.
Yeah. I really... I think that's the most frightening thing, is when you're thinking about the word. We used to go to CND protests and Cymdeithas yr Iaith, Welsh Language Society protest, all the time when we were younger. We were kids. And I had this really huge sort of fear of any kind of nuclear disaster. And I would have, recurrent nightmares and all that sort of stuff. And to find within that massive event, I remember when I was a little girl, and we used to go to these protests, and it was about Wilva, the nuclear plant on Anglesey. And I used to try and figure out, when I was about 7 or 8, I used to figure out, if something went wrong at Wilva, would I have enough time to run home so that I could die with my mum. This was the kind of child I was. And I think that sort of practicality of thinking, well, okay, if this does happen, what happens if I die but the cat survives? What's the cat going to eat? And that sort of, the practical stuff that comes at the end of the world. That's what makes it interesting, right?
Yeah, I think that's the thing with, dystopia fiction. I mean, is that kind of mundane stuff. I'm interested in where as a lot of writers are who are writing them, in where does the food come from? How does this work? How does that? I think I've been thinking a lot recently because of something I'm writing that there is something about dystopia fiction that is actually really tapping into something philosophical about the direction of humankind or the human race, in that we have the problems that the ecological problems that we have could be identified as ones that we have because we've moved so far away from a connection with nature in globalization and urbanization, and what end of the world fiction tells us is that, well, at some point, if everything continues to go in the direction that it's going, we're going to have to relearn what our ancestors knew, which was how to live. I've been reading up a lot about, obviously, because of the flooding in Monmouth where I live, that when settlements first started in the Wye Valley, they started on higher ground because from the Ice Age for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, the soil that was deposited by flooding was so rich on what would become floodplains that it was perfect for agricultural settlements. But they wouldn't build their houses on the floodplain and then just get flooded every year. They'd plant on the floodplain and live above it. Yeah. But of course, what's happened since pretty much the 1980s, fast forward like a few millennia, is that people have been building on the floodplains. So we're going to have to relearn what our Stone Age ancestors knew very well.
Yeah, and that's weird because there's a kind of yearning for it as well. I think, loads of people are moving towards that and wanting to know how they could live without all of this extra stuff. And, people are sort of moving in that direction. But also it's just a weird thing because, I'm always looking at TikTok about how to grow vegetables and think that's just ridiculous. I'm using this really quite crappy sort of digital tool to learn stuff that actually I should just be outside learning it, getting to know the soil.
We're all guilty of that, and it's things that a couple of decades ago we would have gone out and bought a book to learn about, right? And of course, those books are still out there, and they're still being published new as well, aren't they? These, the sort of connection. But I think a lot of those books are about that return to something. They're not so much, Audrey Hepburn's herb garden. They're not those books quite so much. Maybe for the goodness, but they are about journeys, about returning to something. There is a real thirst out there in literature, I think, for books about reconnecting with. I'm reading a really great book at the moment about written by a volunteer lifeboatman in Dungeness, just weirdly, and it's interesting because it's about being a lifeboat volunteer, and that's all interesting because it's a really rich existence that I know nothing about, but it's also about man versus nature, that eternal story strand.
Yeah.
Are you? Is this a scene that you're going to continue to tap at, or are you moving off in a different direction?
No, I think humans are moving in this direction generally. I do. I think stuff like I think we want to be self-sufficient, and we don't know how to be. We haven't really been given those tools. And also it's such a sort of, we don't live in a meritocracy, so you can work really hard your entire life and never own your own space. And I think people are rallying against that and wanting to have somewhere, wanting to have a patch of soil. You know, there's a lot in it. I think it's kind of late stage capitalism, isn't it?
It's that slow death of capitalism, which we thought we were watching a little while ago, but then you forget that, you know, the wheels of history, they turn very slowly, and it's still happening.
Yeah. The one thing I have to say,
I can't put any petrol in my car is just a part of that turning wheel, right?
Yeah. I have to say though that, you know, I do a lot of school visits, a lot of sort of visiting pupils and students who are studying my work. And I get, every time I go and speak to a group like that, I think, do you know what? We're going to be okay. I think the generation who are like, say, 15 to 23 now, they are so much better than we ever were, actually. I think they're so much wiser. There's a lot of kindness that I think was missing in a lot of my generation, and probably in me as well. It just gives me so much hope, because I just think that they're better people than
we're probably the first generation in history to really have ever thought that as well, though, aren't we? About the kids who are coming next.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Apart
also,
from, you know,
I don't know if
the
it's
guy with the Coca-Cola ad.
it might be like, because my sons are part of that generation. So maybe it's a little bit that I'm trying to convince myself that they're going to be okay, because, you know, once you have kids, you've unlocked that massive worry about every generation that's to come.
Yeah.
You don't have to have kids.
David Wallace,
you know what I mean?
David Wallace Wells, who wrote a great book about the end of the world called The Uninhabitable Earth, about climate change. He's a journalist in America, and he wrote this book because I think he was like the climate change correspondent for the New York Times or something. And he addresses the question that people would always put to him about the decline in birth rates in the West. About like, well, you know, he says, I know so many people who aren't having children because the world is, you know, going to shit or whatever. And he said, well, my answer to that is the reason why I've had kids, because he gets asked it, the reason why I've had kids is because I truly believe that my kids could be part of the answer.
Yeah.
They could be the people who find the solutions to all of these problems. They could be the people who become scientists, or, you know, whoever, the people who save the world. And I think, you know, that is a natural way. I find that that being, you know, a fear for the future of humanity being the reason for a decline in birth rate to be one of the most terrifying patterns of our age, I think.
Yeah. It's funny because I've got 3 children, and I feel like I feel like I have more of a stake in the future because of them, but I worry for them a lot and their contemporaries. But I think hope springs eternal as well. And whenever you think about, you know, God, am I bringing these children up just to live in a world? And that's the other thing, that they're brought up in this world that we're always reminding them that the world is going to burn for them. We're always reminding them there will be no food for you. There will be no jobs. There will be, you know, there will be nothing. This is going to be hell. And we don't really introduce any hope. I listened to Nicola Davis, the author Nicola Davis, giving a keynote speech at a conference about this, and it really changed the way I thought, because she was saying about sort of the way that we're writing and what we're introducing to kids these versions of the future, and how we've neglected to offer them hopeful versions, and how things could be really wonderful for them, but that, work has to be done. I'm rephrasing massively here, but it was really inspirational, because I did think then, bloody hell, that is true. And I wasn't raised thinking that the world was burning, We were mildly worried about the ozone layer. But
yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and CFCs, remember those?
Yeah, just don't use spray-on deodorant and we save the world.
That was the one. It's easy, we just all stunk.
So do you think we, when I say we, I mean writers or producers of cultural items, whatever you want to say, do you think we have more of a responsibility than we've been admitting to providing hope?
No, but I think generationally, we have to remember our privilege of being brought up to think that, we had agency and we had hope, and that, if you work really hard, you will get to where you want to be. And that this generation is just being told by everyone that things are going to be really hard for them, whatever they do. And just, we have to acknowledge that pressure that's on them, because I wouldn't really want to be 15 now, to be honest.
Well, what a perfect note to end the
What a
conversation.
really depressing note. Woo!
But
That's my
honestly,
hopeful message for the next generation. I
Yeah,
wouldn't want to be
that
you
was
guys.
Brilliant. Manon, thanks for taking the time to talk. It's been great.
Thank you so much, Gary. Diolch.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
With an audience of one.